So let's begin exploring what's meant by direct variation here, all right? So a constant is a quantity that has a fixed value. So in science, we have plenty of these, like G is 9.8 meters per second squared. We have C is the speed of light. We have capital C, which is used in math a lot to mean constant. It's basically a value that's completely fixed and it never changes. So like 6 and -2 are also constants. Okay, so the opposite is a variable. So a variable can have a range of values, or maybe we already kind of used range last time, so maybe collection of values. So x and y and theta, all these, a, all these things that can take on multiple different values, those are called variables. All right. So we want to explore input-output and look at a certain type of relationship between that. So that type follows this equation. So whenever I say y varies directly with x, you ought to be thinking about y equals kx. So it's a very simple equation. All it says is take the input x, multiply it by k, and that gets you your output y. And we call that altogether, it varies directly. Right? So k is the number that you must multiply the x's y to get the y's. So that's the words. Maybe we ought to take a look at some examples here. So if we have a table of input-output, we're interested right now about looking on how do you get from one to the other. Is it always the same way? So that one's multiplied by 2. This one looks like it's multiplied by 4. But then we get to a point where it's like, I'm not sure what that number is. It's not 4. Yeah? So this means that k is 2. And the formula then would be y equals 2x. So this is a direct variation because it's always multiplied by the same number k. This one, though, is not, because it's multiplied by 4 sometimes, and other times it's multiplied by something different. Even though this is sideways here, we still multiply by the same number, -7, every time. So you can probably guess that that means that k, the number we multiply by, is -7. And of course that means that our equation is kx, so -7x. All right? So in other words, this direct variation exists if the input is always multiplied. So I'm saying that again, multiplied by the same number named k. And nothing's stopping k from being a fraction either. Like, that is a direct variation. Has that form. Okay? And we're going to look at the end graphically, but a direct variation is also a straight line through the origin, 0, 0. So that would look something like this. Okay? So what we're saying is like every point on here, so say this is like 1, 4, this is 2, 8, and so on. If the x is multiplied by the same number every time, it's a direct variation, and it forms this sort of line. Okay? Talk about that in a second. So here we want to know, are these equations showing a direct variation? And if so, what's k? Well, a direct variation, before we even dive into solving for y, remember we're looking for an equation in this form, y equals kx. So this one's, although it's a fraction, it's definitely in the form where k is 7/3, right? So this is a direct variation, even though at the beginning it didn't look like it. It has that form, y equals kx. Here, I need to solve for y, but I also don't want parentheses, so I have to distribute here. So distribute here, distribute here. It turns out that we can divide this whole thing by 7. we want to solve for y and see what the format is. So those few steps, and we get an equation, but it is not. It is not of the form y equals kx. It's got that +1, right? And that affects where it hits the y-axis, right? So this one that we just graphed might look something like this. You know, it doesn't hit the origin. It's a line. We'll talk about those next time too, but it doesn't hit the origin. So this is not a direct variation. And then the last one, it looks maybe a bit weird, but what if we just did this? And then we can just see immediately that k is a 9th. So remember, you can write fractions out front like that, and then that would be k. So this is yes. And this one was yes as well. Okay, so the next 4 problems we're going to do are almost played out the exact same way. So this first one, it says that y varies directly. So I know immediately that it follows this equation, but I don't know what k is. Okay, but I'm given 2 values of x and y. I'm given an input 3 and an output 15 y. So I can use those to find k, is how this is going to work. Right? Everything's multiplied here, so I can divide. And I get 5 as k. So that's my function rule. Like, that's my equation. Okay? And then the last sentence says, what is y when x is 12? Well, if x is 12, then that's 60. So we're done. All right? So again, this same sort of structure, we're going to see that in all these problems. So again, suppose that it varies directly, and we're given these two. So go ahead and pause the video for a second and try and solve the rest of this problem, and I'll include that work on there when you pause it. Okay, so you should have plugged in 9 for y and -15 for k. And we should divide to solve for a missing value. So that's a good answer. I used my calculator for this one because it did give me a nice decimal, but you could also write this as a nice fraction, right? Both have 3, so you could simplify it like that. I'm going to choose maybe to use the decimal. They don't tell us what to do. They just ask you to find it. So I'll just use that for k. And then what is y when x is 25? Well, we go ahead and take 25 and plug that in. So y is -15. Okay, did you get something similar? I hope so. But that's that. Okay, let's look at these 2 word problems. So a salesperson's commission varies directly with sales. So I've been saying y varies directly with x. So let's just give those labels. So the commission, which is that extra bonus that the salesperson gets depending on how well they sell their items. And let's give this x. So then it reads y varies directly with x. Okay, so x are the sales and the commission is y. So I want to label those parts of the problem too. And now it's starting to look like the problem that we just did, right? We're given that this is kx. And we're given 2 values, input, output. X is 1,000, then y is 85. And then we have k, our mystery, constant. So we're going to divide by, we're going to isolate k, and then as the decimal, this is 0.085. Okay? So the function rule is 0.085x. All right. Part B says, what's the commission if X, the sales, is 2,300? So it's the same problem that we did before. Plug in an input into our new equation, and we are going to get an output there, which I believe was 197.5. But let me just double check that. Oh no, it's not 7, it's a 5. Okay? So, and I put the $ because I want to show some sort of unit here in the word problem. Okay? Let's do that one more time. So I'm going to label the stuff for you, and then I want you to try it on your own. So if the number of calories varies directly with the mass of cheese, calories should be y and cheese should be x. So when I say 50 grams of cheese, that's an x value, and this is a y value. So we know the problem told us it's a direct variation. And we have to figure out the function rule. So how would you solve for k, and how would you write the function rule? And pause and try that. Well, k is 4, guys. It's pretty fast. So our function rule, or our equation, is y equals 4x. So that just means that when you're given an input, you have to multiply by 4, and then that's your output. So when this asks me about when x is 70, I'm just going to go ahead and plug 70 in for x. So 280, and we're talking calories here. All right, cool. So the last part before the homework, and those homework problems might differ from the ones you have online, but I hope that works out okay. Do x and y vary directly? If so, what's the constant of variation, and what's the function rule? So this one, it follows, this is direct variation. It goes through 0, 0, and it has a constant slope, meaning that we multiply by the same thing every time, k. So if we want to find out what k is, well, it turns out, guys, that k is the same thing as slope. So 2, 4, 6. Remember, slope is rise over run, so vertical over horizontal. We go up 6, 2, 4, 6, 8. So it turns out that the equation for this line is 6 over 8 times x, which is also 3/4 x. Okay, so k is actually the slope, and the slope, and this positive slope, goes up. But yeah, slope is like the incline. Like if you're driving down the highway and you start going around a hill, that's the incline. That's the slope of. It's also called the gradient. What about these though? This doesn't look like a line. So the answer here is no. And a brief reason why it's no. Well, if you plug in the points here into a table, and you try and play that same game we did at the beginning, like multiply by the same number every time, that doesn't work. For the first one, we multiply by 1, but for the next one, we multiply by 2. So it's just not a direct variation. Okay? So that's it. These homework problems are basically just more practice of what we just did. So I'll have you guys try those out. I'm not sure what format you'll be given for those, but you should have those at least in front of you to work on. All right? Thank you.